So let's go ahead and listen and hear some of the specific things that he wants to see from a physique standpoint within this division.
So what we're looking for in this division is obviously less muscle and less development than you would see in the bikini division. Basically, you still need a small amount of muscle that gives nice shape. We're going to be looking for balance between the upper and the lower body, but the conditioning will be less than bikini. We don't want to see even really a slight separation anywhere in the physique. We don't want to see roundness and capped delts. We don't want to see etched in midsections from the front. From the back, we're looking for full glutes with no visible tie-in area, okay? But the glutes should still be firm when doing the model walk to the back of the stage. So we still want to see firm glutes and some glute development, but not what we're seeing with obviously, top-level bikini pros. We don't want to see, clear tie-ins. We don't want to see a lot of development to the glutes.
So this, I think, is an extremely important variable to clarify. And I love that. Listening to this on the way home last night, I was like, I'm all for this, because I do think there was a shift, and I believe this was 2020, right around the time that Janet Leung won, where it was very much like, okay, they want carved out tie-ins, like they want them dicey and like visible. And that was a rude awakening, because at the time I was getting back into the sport of competing, and the shows I did, I was like, oh, I look way better than I did previously, and I have more muscle, and my shape, looking back, I'm like, my shape was really cute and very feminine and very little, but I looked, I wasn't natural, but I looked very much like a natural athlete. I was lean, but not overly conditioned. And I certainly didn't have a level of muscularity that was wowing anyone. And I think what Tyler is referring to here, he talked about two components, the delts and the glutes, which oftentimes, when I'm explaining the bikini division to Jordan, for instance, I'm like, because he has no background in this. He's like, what are they looking for? I'm like, they want this X frame. Everyone says they don't want an X frame. They kind of want an X frame that's essentially, if you look at every person and you draw an X on their body for how that person's developed, is pretty much an X. Yes, we can argue with semantics and be like, oh, it looks more like an S, it's more curved, whatever. I do want to go through some of the other requirements that Tyler's instilling within this division.
So we want firm glutes, some development to the glutes. Obviously, conditioning from the back as well. We're not looking for those cap shoulders from the back. Don't want to see that. We don't want to see etched in hamstrings. Really, hamstrings should not be visible at all. Like I said, we're not seeing separation. So even tie-ins, the tie-in area should not be visible.
So this is another thing I've tried to explain to Jordan before, because he's like, I don't understand. You need so much glute. I know you don't need quad, but you never talk about hamstring. And I'm like, ooh, yeah. So no, hamstring is something tricky. And it's kind of if you know, you know. There are girls that have some hamstring development who are typically judged down on that detail because of how lean they need to get the visibility of their tie-ins to show up. And because of that, they have to be ultra careful, because it's not like you can undo hamstring development or quad development. Yeah, you cannot train them, but realistically, it's very hard to cause that muscle loss without causing it to also occur in other areas. So where that becomes really tricky is within bikini, I hardly ever train hamstrings. I hardly ever train quads directly, because I'm doing a lot of movements that do have secondary emphasis on these other secondary muscles, but largely biasing glutes is still going to result in some of this development. So I think this is exciting in that it sounds like you aren't going to have as a baseline entry 3 days of glute biased exercises that require no inclusion of isolation work. Truly what it sounds like is that from a muscularity and conditioning standpoint is that they want balance in the lower body. So the glutes, the legs, even as you're walking to the back, they don't want any jiggle, which is going to mean that you're going to have some muscle there, but they don't want separation at the tie-in or the hamstrings. So that's sick, because that means that in theory, I would assume they want hamstring to glute development a little more imbalanced than I'll say bikini is currently.
So we want firm glutes, some development to the glutes. Obviously, conditioning from the back as well. We're not looking for those cap shoulders from the back. Don't want to see that. We don't want to see etched in hamstrings. Really, hamstrings should not be visible at all. Like I said, we're not seeing separation. So even tie-ins, the tie-in area should not be visible. We just want firm glutes here. Basically, what you would see like on an old school fitness magazine cover of a fitness model, this is what we want to see in this division. The front pose is going to be a little bit different. It's kind of going to be like what the bikini front pose used to be back in the day. Again, the picture of Ashley. The front pose is going to be like it used to be back in the day for bikini. You'll have one foot in front of the other. The hips will be slightly tilted. Again, we're looking from balance from top to bottom here. We're not looking for hourglass shape and other things that we look for in bikini. So this is going to be different from bikini.
So what I'm inferring here is he's breaking down the poses in a way where he's like going through and saying, we don't want hourglass. Other words, X frame, because an hourglass is shaped the same shape of an X. The issue with hourglass, X frame, shape, S shape, whatever you want to call it, is that if your waist is not already small, all you can do is build out the upper body and the lower body. You can only make that X if you have a very like narrow X, or I guess, yeah, a very narrow X relative to shoulders and then hips. This is something that you just have to make your hips wider by having more projection in the glutes and having more cappage and width to the delts. I actually just recorded a podcast on this. I think it'll come out probably right after this or right before this. Now, when it comes to modifying that pose, I think that's really strategic because it does take away the emphasis of getting into these super compensated positions where the emphasis is exclusively on the waist being really, really itty bitty. I mean, I would assume that they want the waist to be very tight and still a very like feminine and very pretty shape, but it doesn't sound like there is nearly as much emphasis on ratios, where overall I would say that has allowed the bikini division to become what it is, where it's just the super XC hourglass, but like hourglass on steroids, like figuratively and literally, quite shape.